All right. Welcome again. My name is Raquel Reddy, Vice President of Community Development here at NCST. And so welcome to our March Community Impact Briefing. We have a great presenters here with us today and some wonderful information about a very, very important sector that's doing work across the country, and that's the community economic development sector. We are going to be, and I'll introduce Frank Woodruff and also Chance Sanchez in just a few seconds because I want to do respect in terms of sharing your background with us. But I do want to just share with everyone that today is really about understanding a 3-year study that NACEDA has been working on, grounded in values research and some of the key findings about the community economic development sector. So for everyone here, I think there's just phenomenal information about, going back 2 decades of understanding the very, very important work that community economic development organizations are doing. So with that, I would like to now introduce Frank Woodruff and Chance Sanchez and provide a little bit of their backgrounds. And then we'll get started on the presentation. And Frank will also open us up for a poll as well. But Frank, let me introduce you. Frank Woodruff is a strategic leader dedicated to igniting extraordinary communities and improving lives. In January 2012, Frank became the executive director of the National Alliance of Community Economic Development Associations, or NACEDA. Having grown substantially since then, NACEDA is undergoing a transformative shift to becoming a field-building organization for community economic development. This move aims to create a stronger environment for local strategies, promoting equity and advancing prosperity. Recognizing the need to bolster the system supporting community economic development organizations and networks. Frank leads NACEDA as a catalyst for change. The organization shapes policies, fosters collaboration, builds organizational capacity, and produces cutting-edge research to advance the field, which we'll learn about more today. Frank has spoken at many affordable housing and community economic development conferences. He has been published in Shelterforce, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco Community Development Innovation Review, the Wiley-Blackwell Encyclopedia of Urban and Regional Studies, Next City, the Professionalizing Field of Financial Counseling and Coaching Journal, Policy Perspectives at George Washington University, and numerous other journals and periodicals. Frank holds an executive education certificate from Harvard Kennedy School, a Master's of Public Policy degree from George Washington University, and a bachelor's BA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He lives in Virginia with his wife, Natalie, and sons. So welcome, Frank. We are really delighted to have you here today. Chance Sanchez, welcome as well. Joined NACEDA in June 2022 and rose to the role of research associate in 2023. Chance plays a pivotal role in the Grounding Values and Research Project and coordinates NACEDA's research initiatives. Chance is deeply passionate about data equity, applied research, and continuing education. She brings fresh perspectives on information and data accessibility, alongside a fervor for service and community growth to NACEDA. With a rich background in education and development, Chance has contributed significantly to bridging academic research and practical application. Her experience extends to serving as a Peace Corps education volunteer, where she taught English and economics to secondary students in Benumbu. Did I say that right? Benumbu? I'm sorry, Benumbu, Sierra Leone. And more recently, Chance has been involved in revising and implementing digital literacy curricula with Baker Ripley in Houston, Texas. She's currently obtaining her Master's of Sociology from Illinois State University. Thanks again, Chance and Frank, for being here. It is a delight to have you with us and to be sharing so much about the research that NACEDA has been working on. So with that, Frank, we'll give you the floor, and then if you would like to say a few words before we get the poll started.
Yes. Thank you, Raquel. Thank you for the generous introduction. It's good. I'm looking at the attendees. It's good to see some familiar faces in there. Just a little bit more about NACEDA, as Raquel alluded to, we're transitioning as an organization into a field building strategy for community development organizations, because we believe a stronger community development field leads to stronger communities. And as an alliance, we mobilize resources and support for their work in creating stronger, healthier, and prosperous communities. But enough about us. We'd like to know a little bit more about who's in the room. Raquel, if you wouldn't mind launching the poll, we get a sense of who's here.
Okay, I just launched the poll, so everybody should be seeing that. There's a drop-down menu there.
Great. We'll just let this run about for 30 seconds or so, right, Raquel, and
Okay,
reveal the results.
great. Okay. I will go ahead and end the poll and then show the results here now.
Okay. Great. Not a
Good
community development
audience.
organization? Yes, good audience, good diverse audience. A little bit from government and philanthropy as well.
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. So let's dive into our research agenda. I'm going to connect to the research agenda a little bit to NACEDA as an organization. So our field building strategy calls us to do network and collaboration with the field, capacity building, advocacy on behalf of the field, and research. We develop and disseminate research about the field and use our national leverage to advocate for funding and support for the field. I think prior to, as Raquel stated, this has been about a 3-year effort, about $1 million, including, and we involved a number of consultants, including the Urban Institute, Third Space Action Lab, and others. NCST, and Raquel specifically, has been on the advisory committee for this project the last few years. We really thank her and NCST for their service to the project. But the identity of local community development organizations has been basically unknown for 20 years. And it's been at best a missed opportunity for the communities we serve to not have this information. And we'll get into a little bit of what that missed opportunity is here as we go along. Chance, if you go to the next slide, please. But first of all, who are we talking about? In the Urban Institute report and some of our publications, we refer to these organizations as community-based development organizations. We are transitioning to using the term community development organization to kind of shorten it a little bit and make it a little more accessible. So we may use those terms interchangeably as we go along here, but we're talking about the same thing: nonprofit organizations with the missions of improving lives in lower income communities. And they have usually some sort of impact on the built environment, developing affordable housing, commercial space, community facilities, et cetera, and or support small businesses. And I think it's important to keep in mind the definition of how we went out and found these organizations. It took us almost a year to find them all, but it was quite an endeavor. And I will say, as we go along, the list of about 6,000 organizations that we found, it is not a perfect list. There are, or if anyone were to look really closely at it, you'll find organizations that maybe not be there, and some that are definitely missing. So it's not perfect, but I will also guarantee you that it's the best list ever put together. Those are the organizations we're talking about. Chance, if you go to the next slide. And then we undertook this research project to raise the visibility of these organizations. Again, a more understood field, a healthier field, has a better impact on the communities that they serve. And we wanted to understand and distinguish the role they play in the community development system. The community development system, including public policies that impact communities, investors that impact communities, other nonprofits that interact in the sector, policymakers, et cetera. We wanted to, for the first time, take a really explicit racial equity lens to the field. In prior decades, when similar research had been done by other entities on the field, that really wasn't as explicit of a focus, and so we wanted to bring that lens to this project. Excuse me. Of course, we wanted to inform federal policy, and we want this research to be sustained over time, because you'll see that we've lost sight of what these organizations, who these organizations are, and what they produce, and it's quite a bit. And the fact we didn't know it for 20 years is, like I said at the outset, at best a missed opportunity. So if you go to the next slide, please, Chance. And this is what we found. We found 6,000 organizations with about $54 billion in assets and almost $23 billion in annual revenue. That is a huge field. And the fact that we've lost track of these over the last 20 years, again, is at best was a missed opportunity. So that was my lead-in and introduction. I'll be back a little bit for a different part of the presentation, but to get a little bit into the production conversation, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Chanse. Chanse?
Definitely. Thank you, Frank. Who doesn't like to talk about what we accomplish? So one of the things that I wanted to point out when we look at this slide before we move towards the other ones is, as Frank mentioned, financially, we're a significant field. Like if you're looking at the presence of community developers at the national level, we're contributing to the economy. But beyond that, and as I'm going to talk about with our production numbers, our field of community developers is not, they do make a difference to their community, but as a whole, they are greatly contributing to production at the national level. And not only that, they're contributing in a lot of different ways. One of the biggest findings that we found through the Grounding Values research project was that this traditional conception of community development organizations just engaging in business support or place-based development like real estate, housing, was just part of the picture. In fact, when we looked at what these groups were engaging in, more than anything else, they were engaging in social services. These are things like providing education, job training, childcare services, health services, other sorts of advocacy-based endeavors as well. In fact, not only was the variety, just the menu of options, an important finding, but the fact is that organizations themselves are wearing a lot of hats. Like we say that to each other all the time. What does your organization do? Well, quite a bit. And now we have the numbers to prove that. So in addition to development activities, these organizations we're talking about provide 9 different distinct services that could be described as community organizing, resident services, or advocacy. That's 9 different things on top of the real estate development and business support that they're already providing, which leads to some significant conversation around what does internal management look like. But just because we do a lot of different things doesn't mean we're not also achieving a lot of different things. So here on the screen, you'll see numbers that we collected during our Grounding Values and Research Census project on real estate production between 2019 and 2021. So these numbers are associated with those about 6,000 organizations that you saw on the map earlier. And what we find is that in just this 3-year period, there were significant contributions made to both affordable housing in the form of rental units, but also transitional and emergency housing, and owner-occupied home repairs, weatherizations, construction and rehabilitation. One of the phrases that sticks out when we discuss this with many of our field leaders is, not only is this significant in terms of just absolute numbers, always good to see that many zeros and digits, but also in terms of impact. One of the things that really sets apart community development organizations is that it's not just the right number of units, it's the right units in the right place at the right time. Additionally, like we said, a lot of these organizations are involved in the building of places and the built environments, but they're also supporting small businesses and business development. What we found, again, out of those 6,000 organizations is that 1/6 of them, in addition to their other development activities, are making loans and grants to support real estate development, down payment assistance, and other sorts of business development, which totals up to $3.5 billion in financial aid, and this is just in the 3 years between 2019 to 2021. So those are some of the numbers to set the ground for exactly what we're achieving. And now the question becomes, how are we achieving it? So I hand it back to Frank to talk a little bit about the resources and the money.
Great, thanks, Chance. The way we oriented this research project, everyone, is we had an effort aimed at production, and that Chance just went through, and we looked at activities, types of social services, types of development. We gave you the Cliff Notes version for our understanding of the NCST audience that would be here today. There's a lot more on our website, including commercial space, something we just didn't prioritize for this presentation, and among others. And that's on our website, and we'll provide links and things like that afterwards. But the other piece of this was to understand the financial picture of the organizations. Those big B numbers we showed you at the outset, where did those come from? The Urban Institute pulled 990 organizations for the field of 5,700 organizations to tell a little bit of a financial story. And we supplemented that over the last year or so with our own research. So Chance, if you go to the next slide. Just as a reminder, this is the universe of organizations that we're talking about. If you go to the next slide, Chance. One of the big findings that came out of this is the amount of resource concentration in the field. The top quarter of organizations, so the top quartile, the largest 25 organizations in terms of revenue, have 80% of revenue for the whole field. And this is a big deal. We think this is a really big deal. I think, within any kind of sector of the economy, healthcare, tech, et cetera, it's not necessarily surprising when the big guys get all the money, so to speak. And there are kind of other firms that come in and out of the market. That's not necessarily surprising in and of itself. But within this field, where organizations are representing whole places, the stakes seem a little bit higher. If there are organizations in more often representing communities of color, which is something we'll get to a little bit, among other disinvested and underserved places, if they're coming in and out of the market, those are whole places being left behind and have a reduced ability to access community development resources. So the stakes seem higher for this picture, and it's a problem. And it's something we want to try to do something about. Next slide, Chance. Another story we wanted to tell is, do certain types of communities get their fair share of community development resources? So what we did is like, well, and what does that mean? Do urban communities get more than rural or small medium metros? Who's getting their fair share? And so it's a little bit of a tricky question to answer. But what we tried to do is measure the proportion of the community development resources that, in this case, let's go to the bottom line, go to urban areas, large metros. 55% of the expenditures in the field are made in large metros. And so it's like, is that a lot or a little? And so what we did is we tried to offer some comparators. Well, since these are kind of poverty serving organizations, for lack of a better way to put it, what percentage of the poverty population do urban areas have? And they have about 52% of the poverty population. So they get about 55% of the money and 52% of the poverty population, kind of more or less getting what one would think they would get. Rural areas, non-metros being at the top, similarly, maybe getting a little more than one would predict. Where we see the gap, which was, I don't know, a good finding, I don't know if it was surprising, a little bit surprising to me, is in the smaller to medium metros. Especially the medium to small cities are not getting what one would think they would get for community development resources. And the question is why? I don't know. We ask that question as we go around with this information. There are lots of guesses out there, but it's important to know that community development resources through these organizations, a substantial part of the field, are not getting to small and medium metros the way that they should. This chart, I should say, because I've gotten in trouble with this presentation in the past, shows what slice of the pie these areas are getting. It doesn't say whether the pie is big enough or not. This is not to say that urban areas are solving poverty or should be with the amount of resources they get, but given the size of the pie, is everyone getting about the slice they should? Is one way to think about this. And there's a problem in small and medium metros. Next slide, Chance. All right, so here's where we're going to ask you to fire up your fingers for the chat here in a little bit. Another thing we tried to do is we partnered with NeighborWorks America to define how financially healthy the field is. Fairly straightforward question, especially if you work for an investment agency, but a really hard one to answer. And we partnered with NeighborWorks to come up with a pretty complex methodology to looking at ratios like cash on hand, debt to income ratios, et cetera, et cetera. So the trivia question for you is, if you want to put in the chat, we broke the field up into 4 categories: excellent, good, adequate, and fragile financial health. I want you to guess what percentage of the field do you think is financially fragile, percentage-wise. You want to put your answers in the chat. We'll wait maybe 15 seconds. Coming in, answers coming in. Familiar faces in this. Okay, we'll do the reveal here in chance 3, 2, 1. About 20%. About 18% is financially fragile. I see a lot of responses here, north of 40%, north of 50%. I would say this is probably, I don't know what it is, the, I don't know, 8th time we've done this presentation, something like that. We've done this presentation a lot with this question, and we, frequently get an answer north of 50% or more. And it's frankly just not true. And so this is kind of one of the mythbusters. This is a theme of a mythbuster we want to try and get past with the research, is that these organizations are financially healthy as a field as a whole, and they're ready for investment, right? And therefore their communities are ready for investment. And that's part of the case we really want to passionately make. And we have a whole report out that we released last month that gets into more details if you want a little bit of more of the technical definition of how we got to this. But we're ready for investment, and if you want to join us in that, we're happy to have you. Chance, would you go to the next slide? Running a little low on time. I'll go quicker. We wanted to tell the financial health story by race. That's a question we got early on before we had a hard and fast data to tell this story. This picture here that you're seeing is basically what one would unfortunately maybe predict, is that if an organization was led, the executive director was a person of color, they were worse off financially by all of these measures. And these are Urban Institute numbers. Similarly, if regardless of the race of the director, if the organization served a community that was more concentrated by people of color, the numbers also look similar to this. There's an equity problem here, right? There's an equity problem in our field that leaders of color need more support. Their organizations need to improve their abilities to receive and receive their leadership and maximize their leadership. The system is not set up for them to succeed. And I don't think that's necessarily surprising, maybe to some of us, but we do have quantitative information that backs that up. If you go to the next slide, please, James. We wanted to get a little bit about what federal money is going to these organizations. This was not a surprise to NACEDA. Anyways, we've collected informally this information in the past, so it's good to have the Urban Institute's backing on this. But home and CDBG are the most commonly used programs. And I think it was about 90% of organizations got at least 50,000 federal dollars in our research period 2019 to 2021. So the federal government plays a large role here and needs to do better, but they do play a large role. Next slide, James. And I think, and the last point here is, this one's kind of a tough one. We're a little low on time, but we wanted to know what types of money from what sources are going to what types of organizations. And as Chance said, what we did is we took the field of 6,000 organizations, and what do they primarily do? They primarily do the pie chart that Chance had at the beginning, the common denominator was pretty much all of them. The vast majority of them do real estate development, at least of some kind, even if they primarily do social services or something else, do real estate development or small business development. And so for organizations that, for example, primarily do social services, where do they get their money? Well, 54%, half of their money comes from government grants. Just to give you a sense of how to read this chart. Real estate developers, the middle line, gets a lot less from federal grants and a lot more from the green line, which is basically earned revenue, and other contributions being philanthropy, private philanthropy, non-government philanthropy. And so real estate developers in this field are supporting themselves with a lot of their earned money, their own earned resources, certainly relative to other types of organizations within the field, though even across the nonprofit field in general, this is pretty exceptional in terms of the amount of earned revenue that these organizations raise. So, well, with that, I will conclude. I think we will take questions. You can scan the QR code to access our full report. That'll take you to our website. But if there are any questions, we'll take them in the chat.
Yes, so now we're heading to QR, QA time. The QR code is up here. We're going to be changing it to some high-level findings in a second, but just in case you missed it in the chat, we will be sharing this PowerPoint, which will have hyperlinks to all of the research data reports that we use to create these numbers.
Yeah, and just so folks know as well, Chance, this will be up on NCST's website, and we usually give it about 24 hours, and we'll have the recording and the presentation up on our website as well under our video gallery. So just so folks know, as Chance and Frank mentioned, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. Sometimes it goes in chat. We're going to monitor both of those. So if you have anything that you'd like to ask, please go ahead and do so now. Let's see anything coming up. So I'll start with a question, Frank, just so, I mean, this is just incredible information, number one, right? And the Mythbuster especially, because it does start to change the perceptions, right, about the fragileness of what people think is a fragileness of the sector versus the strength that we're seeing, obviously, in the findings that you shared with us. What are ways that, what are the ways that NACEDA is looking at to take those organizations, take those community economic development organizations that are the strongest and help to build the capacity of other organizations that might not be where they are right now?
Mm-hmm. So in a slightly longer version of the answer to that question, Raquel, what I will say is, in the lead up to this project, in the kind of first part of 2021, I had almost 100 one-on-one conversations with our members, partners. I think Raquel, you were one of them. I had a lot of one-on-ones to ask, and I asked basically one question: what do you want this research project to get to look into? And the relationship between bigger organizations and smaller organizations came up shockingly often, and it came up in a couple different ways. The first was there's a trend out there that's negative in extractive. There's the common complaint that we heard that smaller organizations get taken advantage of by large organizations. Larger organizations are able to access federal resources, for example, and use the smaller organization for the community engagement, pay them their $25,000, but they take the big developer fee. So there's an extractive conversation out there. There's a true partnership conversation out there that kind of tells the opposite story, is that smaller organizations are given backbone support, developer advice, consulting by larger organizations to help build their capacity and play a more equitable role in the development process. And so I think this is a part. The short answer to your question is, Raquel, I think it's really, really important. I don't know what the answer is. But given the resource concentration that we have in this field and the real need for the communities that we care about to have these types of organizations that are productive and healthy, the bit larger organizations have to play a role in that in order for it to work the way we need it to.
Yes. Well, thank you for, thank you for your answer. And I think, for us, and we've been seeing, we have a couple other questions that have come in, but I will share, some things that we're seeing through a place-based lending fund that we have, is that we're finding developers that are bringing up, from a mentoring standpoint, really trying to build up the capacity of smaller emerging developers that are more neighborhood focused, right? So just putting that out there and that's sort of their own informal way. I know they're formal mentoring programs, but that could also be one of the ways that NACEDA will put this too. So we have a couple.
No, I was just going to add, and there's, as unsurprisingly, like there's conversations of tensions related to race in those conversations too. Larger organizations slightly more likely to be white-led, smaller organizations, and according to our data, more likely to be financially unhealthy organizations led by people of color. And so there's that dynamic too, which is really hard, but it's also very real. And one thing we chose not to include in this presentation, though it is on our website and in the reports, is when executive directors were asked as part of our study if what their perception of the professional development opportunities for leaders of color in our field, like north of 80% of all, or north of 70% of all respondents, regardless of their race, thought people of color, leaders of color in our field, didn't have access to the basics, like peer sharing, peer sharing, mentorship, like real basic stuff. And north of 70% of our leaders of color in this field don't have access to the basics. Like, we got a problem, and that we really need to deal with. And that's just another data point to kind of support what I said earlier, is like, this system right now is not set up to support leaders of color, or really, frankly, support lots of different kinds of leaders in our field, leaders of color in particular, and the system needs to change.
Spot on. I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that as well. I do have a couple questions that we'll go through now, if that's okay. So from Kevin Moody, first off, he says, great work. How do the results get shared to others to assist us achieve our goals? I mean, Kevin, I'm not sure if you mean sort of from a lending standpoint or a funder standpoint, but I'll leave it open for Frank or Chance to answer.
Chance, do you want to go first, or should I?
I'd love it if you could take this one. I'll share the slide a little bit later where we talk about some of the ways we're sharing it to the field in the future.
Great. Sure. Okay. I would say, I mean, the kind of really practical ways I think this can be useful. We have a methodology that we've made public on the financial health metrics. Like I said, we did in partnership with NeighborWorks. We talked to lenders in our field like LISC and others to see, like, well, how do you underwrite deals? So make it real practical. And so I think that methodology is helpful. Also, a bit of the mythbusters, like about how healthy the field is in general. Also keeping in mind, and I should have mentioned this earlier, whether they're financially healthy or not by our standards is not the same question as to whether they're productive or not, or whether they're adequately serving their community. Those are different questions. But I think there's something to be said here for the investor community about how these organizations' finances work, because the methodology that we took with NeighborWorks was pretty involved. And I don't go into details here for a reason, because I don't, I don't know the details of it necessarily, though it is spelled out on our website. And also I would encourage, I think bigger picture, I would just encourage us all to, like, this is going to sound cliche, but we all do better when we all do better. Like, if we really care about all the communities we serve, we have to care about all the organizations too. There's just, in this field, there's just no getting around that. And so our policies, our funding strategies, our capacity building programs, whatever those programmatic efforts look like, they have to follow that. They have to follow that desire and that mission.
Thank you, Frank. Next question came in anonymously, but I will read it here. I was curious to know what is the GDP contribution of the sector? Sorry if you already mentioned and I missed it.
Yeah, I kind of skated past that. Chance, would you go back to that slide?
Was that the comparison slide?
Yeah, it's slide 12. Yep,
No.
that one. So both the GDP and poverty population proportions were meant as kind of comparators. right? So if 55% of the resources in urban areas go to urban areas, one would expect urban areas to have about that percentage of the poverty population and about that percentage of the GDP in an ideal world. And so it's meant as a comparator to their relative contribution to the economy. In other words, are they getting back what they put in is one simple way to think of it.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Marcia, thanks for your question, Marcia Nedlund. It was very concerning to see the difference in financial health of organizations led by people of color. Did you cross-tab any other findings by leadership? And are there any efforts to customize support to organizations led by people of color?
I can take this one, Frank.
Sure, go ahead.
Yes. So we have good news and bad news with this is we did crosstabs with other aspects of data we collected, but this is the first year we're doing this, and we didn't have enough data for some subcategories to get very reliable crosstabs. But there are some that we didn't share in here that did pop out as far as what types of communities are organizations led by people of color serving, because it does have an impact on what your demographic target audience looks like, whether it's rural or urban, whether it's predominantly, I think we went with 80% or below AMI, whether it's predominantly a community of people of color. So in the reports that we're going to link, and I was going to take the next question we answer as a chance to plug some of those reports, but it explores a little bit more about the dynamics, about the findings of what impact that having a leader of color has on different aspects of community development organizations.
Yeah, thanks, Chance. Yep, there's a section in Urban's report on that. There were two other crosstabs that we didn't mention that come to mind. One is organizations, communities that are more populated by people of color are more likely to have an organization serving them that has a leader of color. So that maybe what one would expect in terms of trend. The other thing that I find really interesting is at the outset, near the beginning, Chance talked about the average organization doing on average 9 things. That's a lot. 9 things, and for leaders of organizations led by people of color, that average goes up. So organizations led by people of color are actually doing more than 9 things on average. As Chance alluded to, there are, for capacity builders, like if you do training or you do investing, like there are consequences for how you deliver services to those organizations. Managing 9 things is very unique for anyone who does small business work. If you're coaching a small business on getting started with like $1 million in annual revenue, like you're coaching them on how to simplify and how to do, a common strategy is to simplify and teach them how to do the things they do really well. The average organization is $3 million in annual revenue. How are you going to scale 9 activities with $3 million? Not necessarily scale is your goal, but like those dollars get spread real thin really quick. And there are consequences for us as capacity builders on serving those organizations, and other implications. I also did want to say on this slide, since this slide is up, I want to be real careful that about how we talk about leaders of color and the role they play in their organizations. This is a common thing that I see in our field from our partner organizations and others, and we're as guilty of it as well. But we had to be real careful about talking about leaders of color as if there's some sort of deficit. They offer some sort of deficit. Training programs for leaders of color implies that they're not quite yet good enough to lead, for example, just as an example. There's an implication there. We all need to improve in our leadership skills. We all need to do better. The organizations themselves, though, also have to be ready for that leadership. And there is data here that implies that those organizations and the system that supports those organizations is not set up to do that. And so I just want to be real careful about how we talk about the needs of leaders of color, because it goes beyond just their professional development needs, as we all have. It goes to the organizations and the system that supports those organizations as well.
Thank you for that, Frank. One more question here. Do we know how impactful the field is? I was wondering if we wanted to showcase success of the field apart from the revenue, which does not capture the impact. What kind of factors do we look at? I think you touched on this with, the number of units that were created either for rental housing or single family or climate resiliency. And probably this is in the report as well, but just wanted to give you a chance to answer this again.
Definitely. Can I take this one, Frank?
Sure.
Excellent. So we did curate some of the numbers that we brought here to NCST. We definitely took more of a real estate focus, which is why most of the numbers were associated with that to some degree. But there are a lot of other measures of impact that we collected through the course of this research, as far as number of people served or the different services that these organizations actually engage in. Like we gave you that 9 different activities number. Well, what are the most common activities that fall in those 9? And information like that is included in our other reports, which we linked in here. This will take you directly to the various Urban Institute reports that we have. This, the State of Community-Based Development Organizations has a lot of the information related to impact and related to leadership in our field. This Financial Health of Community-Based Development Organizations has a lot of the numbers related to averages on how large are organizations' expenses, revenues, where are they getting their money from. And this Money Meets Community series is an NACEDA initiative that really delves deep into the intersection between those two, where we really start to describe financial health and what can be done with some of these numbers and how we can use them to further the field. If you're into research and data, the data sets that we use to create all of these research are also public, linked to them here. And as far as furthering the impact in the future, we're also holding a series of grounding values webinars, starting with an exploration of our first issue brief called Storied Communities, Community Stories, where we go through the role of resident voices on community development field and how we really incorporate the perspective of the communities we're trying to serve into the work that we are doing and into the work that they are benefiting from. One last thing that I'd like to plug, as far as if you want to use this specifically in your geographic area, in addition to an overall report on financial health, we also created fact sheets for every single state, for every region, and for every metropolitan area with at least 10 different organizations. You can find them at this link right here, and it'll give you information on the actual state in your area of community development.
Chance, can I just say how incredible this is? I mean, it is just incredible. It's everything that you mentioned here it gives us the tools to go out and tell the story, and also for funders that are either on this call or maybe not on this call, an opportunity to maybe change or update the dialogue, right? The perceptions that are out there. This is just fantastic information for everyone on the CIB call today. You'll definitely have this resource provided to you, and I would encourage everyone to go out and use it in either your specific way or collaboratively. It's fantastic. Thank you, Frank and Chance and NACEDA, for doing the work and providing the studies.
Thank you, Raquel. Thanks for having us.
It has been an absolute pleasure. We're going to welcome now my colleague, Elizabeth Coates. Frank and Chance, you can still, continue to join us as we wrap up our call today. But Elizabeth, please feel free to provide the latest and greatest from the policy perspective for our audience.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to join in the chorus with Chance to acknowledge and appreciate all the great work that NACEDA has done through Chance and Frank's presentation and research. NACEDA is such an important advocacy partner to NCST and the Homeownership Alliance. It's been excellent having you all lend this really important voice to this discussion as we're all considering how it is that we can improve the nature of affordable housing through this nonprofit delivery system that we know is tried and true. So thank you again for that time today and for the education you've all provided. I'll provide just a little bit of some updates and throw some links in the chat as I usually do, so folks can learn a little bit more about our initiatives at NCST. First, I will always begin with the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. I've put a link in the chat to the Neighborhood Homes Coalition. Those of you very well may be aware, or if not, then we'll let you know that NCST is one of the co-leads of the Neighborhood Homes Coalition. That is the advocacy arm to be able to get this to passage. Now, some of you may be well aware that the House has passed a tax package as a 2-ish months ago or something like that, that included some housing provisions on the LIHTC side, but not anything in the realm of affordable homeownership. While that was something that certainly was disappointing to the coalition at first, as we are seeing now that this tax package looks to not have very much progress at all being made in the Senate. That could be for a lot of different reasons, for perhaps an election year, perhaps any sort of bipartisan action might be fodder for some sort of counter campaigning as folks are seeking re-election. That's an unfortunate way that our politicians tend to do things, but that is the reality that we live in. So I am actually appreciative that Neighborhood Homes is not tied up with kind of this tug of war and back and forth. And additionally, the tax package, the length of time that this tax package that's being considered would last would only be up until 2025. If we are looking to launch an important and impactful first-time tax credit for affordable homeownership, we want to make sure we have more than a year and some months to be able to deliver on what it is that we believe this legislation can do. So the next step now for the Neighborhood Homes Coalition, firstly, is to ignite all of our partners, both national as well as local organizations that many of you serve, to make sure that your member of Congress understands the importance of this legislation. And then when it comes time for in 2025, we'll have a new Congress, we'll have new leadership. In some cases, we'll certainly have more folks in the room, and all of these legislative efforts are going to be revamped, particularly in 2025. It's called the Super Bowl of the tax policy. Lots of tax credits or other tax provisions are coming for expiration in 2025, which means that this is a good opportunity for us to be able to tack on neighborhood homes as a key priority. So we need to make noise now that this is something that's crucial for Congress to consider. So when it comes time for all of us that have lots of different tax priorities, and not just us in the field, but also many well-funded interest groups that maybe are not mission-driven in the same way we are, we still need to fight with the big dogs in all means, in all shapes, and all forms. So please take a look at the work that we do there. And if you've got any questions on how you can be able to engage your member of Congress, please let me know. That's our priority one on the legislative side. I'll jump into regulatory just because we've had a few updates since I was able to address this group. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, as everybody knows, has recently closed a week ago last Monday a comment period to opine on the design of CDBG and then the subsequent Section 108 loan program. NCST and the Homeownership Alliance drafted and submitted a joint letter to HUD to be able to elevate our concerns with the rulemaking and also laud them for the steps that HUD did take. And on the latter point, and those of you that have created some of your own comment letters might have seen this as well, there was a lot of focus on economic development, the economic development side of the ledger. And we think that's very important, particularly in targeting distressed areas, majority minority populations. Those are all efforts that we really want to be able to see CDBG maximized and the funding to go even much further than it does now. Unfortunately, despite lots of our discussions that NCST and many of our partners have had with HUD in really looking to push CDBG to be able to use more effectively for homeownership, we didn't see any reforms in this rulemaking that addressed that. So our letter that you all have access to really focused on the importance of homeownership as a means for majority minority populations, for underserved communities to be able to harness and access economic development and community and neighborhood revitalization. So you'll see a bit of a behemoth of a letter there, but we promise that we really ensured that it could be accessible to anybody, whether you've been working in the policy field for quite a while, or this is not something really relevant to you at this juncture. But we really wanted to ensure that homeownership doesn't get lost as HUD prepares this final rule. In addition to our focusing on existing programs that receive annual funding, such as CDBG, we're also keeping an eye on another tax credit, which is the New Markets Tax Credit. And we saw that there is a little bit of utilization of that tax credit based on the NACEDA reports and some of the stakeholders that Frank and Chance represent. So it was good to see that, because I was planning to discuss a little bit of our New Markets Tax Credit work. So the Homeownership Alliance, again, that is our trade association made up of nonprofit organizations that are experts in homeownership. We convene a working group called the New Markets Tax Credit Working Group for Homeownership. And there, many of you very well may be aware that while it's not heavily advertised at the CDFI fund level, there is a method to be able to use New Markets Tax Credit for developing owner-occupied units. A lot of that cloudiness on that eligibility, we believe, really does exist on Treasury's lack of transparency that this is an option. And a lot of that we feel like could be improved with retooling the application for allocation process. So luckily enough, there actually is a federal comment period open now on the New Markets Tax Credit 2024 proposed application. And the CDFI fund has provided a template that is open for comment through April 23rd. So we've got a little bit over a month to be able to get our responses in order. I've shared what it is that looks like in the chat. That's great, Marcia, that you all are participating in that. I would love to, I'm so glad that's something that's relevant to you and hopefully others on this call. And perhaps you're keeping an eye on this federal register comment period as well. So as I mentioned, we've got through April 23rd to be able to provide comments here, and I will put a link to what the Federal Register is asking. So hopefully many of you that are either participating in New Markets or you would like to at some point, or maybe you've got some comments on how it is that the application could probably ease itself up to make it a little bit easier for your organization's purposes, please look into it. Please provide your voice. It's important for the CDFI fund to know how they can shape this application process. And if you want a little bit of a taste of what it is that the Homeownership Alliance is going to opine on with our public comment, please take a look at this link in the chat, which has our policy options memo to be able to expand homeownership for within the New Markets Tax Credit. If you are interested in being a part of our working group and you are a local organization, you must be a Homeownership Alliance member. So if that is tantalizing to you and you would like to learn more about what it is that we do, I do encourage you to fill out this contact form right here. We're all interested parties. Again, if you're a nonprofit doing affordable homeownership work, we welcome you with open arms to be a part of our alliance. So please take a look at that as well. And lastly, if you've got any other additional questions on the Homeownership Alliance, on our working group, on neighborhood homes, on any other federal policy items that we have alerted to you all today, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much, as always, for lending your ears as we close out this CIB call. And thank you so much, Terry, for, I see your note in there on sending around those links. Certainly, as Raquel provides follow-up, we can make sure that we do that. I'm on every month. Sometimes if it isn't me, it's one of my policy colleagues, and we re-up just about all of these items with every CIB call that you all can tune into.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I, just can't say enough about sharing the information that we did share today, both from NACEDA and obviously Elizabeth, just providing as much as we can for folks to get involved and to make sure that their voices are heard and that you have the reports that you need to have these conversations. So we really see ourselves as an organization that helps to support and build up just the practice. So please lean on any of us here. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me as well. All this information, again, will be noted on NCST's homepage, including Middle Neighborhoods. So make sure to check us out there as well. Thank you all for attending, and thank you to our presenters today. It has been just an incredible presentation today. And I just want to share, don't miss out on next month. So our next community impact briefing call is scheduled for April the 17th. We'll be getting out some information on that call here in the next couple of weeks, but just very excited to continue having the ability to communicate with everyone here. We have a quick Q&A. All right, thank you, Kevin. Thank you. Great presentation to everyone. Thanks for that comment. Thank you for being here, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.